Hello and welcome from me, Curtis Hutchinson and Philip Nothard, to this special Motor Trade Radio podcast interview. Many thanks for joining us for this weekday special episode, and today we're delighted to welcome back to the podcast Steve Young, Managing Director of ICDP, the International Automotive Retailing and After-Sales Consultancy. Steve's also the former CEO of LDV Group and will be familiar to many listeners for his unmissable weekly blogs on LinkedIn, which take a deep dive into hot topics impacting the car retailing sector. So welcome back to the Motor Trade Radio podcast, Steve.
Thanks, Curtis. Thanks, Philip. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, welcome back, Steve. I know you've had a busy, probably, well, not necessarily, the probably doing your members' meetings is probably easier than the setting up of them. But yeah, I know you've been busy over the last sort of week getting those done, and I can imagine being a fly on the wall in those meetings recently with everything that's going on. But welcome back.
Yeah, I think we look forward to actually having a wall to be a fly on. So,
well, there is that, yes. The screen.
Yeah, unfortunately, it was still a virtual meeting, but we're back to face from May. So we've got a used car workshop coming up at Brooklands in May, which is a great venue and clearly another very topical subject at the moment. So we're looking forward to actually seeing people and spotting whether they're asleep or taking notes or whatever.
Yes. Seeing the whites of their eyes.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yes, definitely. So, I mean, welcome back to this series of regular chats. And we thought we'd focus this episode on the blog that you posted this week about the impact of the war in Ukraine is having on the automotive sector. And, you know, you do make it clear in the blog it's the least important thing about the suffering in Ukraine is how it affects our business lives, whilst acknowledging there will be an impact, and the members sort of have already approached you for sort of an assessment on the situation. So to give our chat some context, you have a unique perspective on the ramifications for the automotive sector, because back in 2006 you were the chief operating officer of GAZ, the Russian commercial vehicle maker.
Well, of GAZ International, which was something that they created on their initiative. I mean, the late Martin Leach and I were sat in my study at home plotting other things for our years ahead, and got a call asking whether we'd be interested in setting up and heading a venture to basically develop GAZ, which was one of the largest commercial vehicle manufacturers in the world at that time, outside of the CIS, so outside of the former Soviet Union. And that sounded like an interesting opportunity, and the first part of that was the acquisition of LDV, which had fallen into the hands of private equity who'd literally, didn't realize that a catalyst was made from platinum and other precious materials and things like that, and thought they could just go out and source it like bits of chemicals for araldite. So really totally out of their depth. So we got involved in running LDV and making good progress on that, and lined up a number of other deals which would have been really quite transformational for GAZ, and in a broader context really quite significant for Russia, because the thinking at that time was very much about Russia competing on the world stage and economically, and winning economically, not through running tanks into the neighboring countries. And that was a great opportunity for a while. But even in the time that we were there, then the politics changed, the focus changed, and it became a different focus. It was about, producing a national car for Russia, and the objectives changed, and we both moved on. Unfortunately, with that changed focus, then LDV itself then ran into difficulties without the continuing support from Russia. But it was a great opportunity over 18 months or so to see how things could be, and to be part of something that could have been quite remarkable. I think it could have been a very different company. We had deals lined up in India, deals lined up in Italy, a deal lined up in Turkey, a great JV in China, and then the mood changed.
Now, Steve, last week on the podcast, we actually talked about the role that Ukraine played in supplying wiring harnesses to European manufacturers. How do you think this is impacting supply into Europe and the UK in terms of cars? Certainly, in the short term, because we don't know about the medium and long term. But what's your take on how that's impacting car production?
Well, it's changing, literally by the day. So, you see different news coming out of Volkswagen, for example, or BMW today compared to only at the beginning of this week. So, I think there clearly have been some production losses, and some of those will continue, but some of the lines that were stopped are also now restarting. The thing about wiring harnesses, which is the main product that's affected, is it's a relatively easy lift and shift operation, and it's always tended to be quite mobile, quite fluid in terms of where they're made. As the labor rates go up in one location, then the manufacturers like Leone, which is the primary one involved here, shift all the kit to another country with a even lower cost labor. So I don't know to what extent the resumption of production is because they feel they're able to continue some production in Ukraine, or because they've done the lift and shift and moved the necessary fixtures and so on to another neighboring country. But they're working their way through it, and I think that's, although it's disruptive, is not going to be the major issue that comes out of this conflict.
Yeah, and in terms of wiring harnesses, were the bulk of them made in Ukraine?
Not if you look at it in the context of total European vehicle production, but for certain models, then it's sole source. So if that plant is damaged, or your labor has understandably tried to save their own lives and their families' lives by getting out ahead of any hostilities, then for that particular product line, then you can't build a car without a wiring harness. It's literally the first thing that goes in. The body shell's built, painted, in goes the wiring harness. So.
I mean, that is a good point you made there. I think it's even we've come out of the semiconductor issue, and we know there's workarounds taking place still in that, where Ford have decided now, where they weren't supplying vehicles with items missing, they've now decided they are going to supply vehicles into particularly the US with items, non-safety items missing. But I think that view and understanding of that manufacturing process, that one item and the wiring harness or wiring loom, as many people might know it as, is a significant part of the process right at the start. It's like you say, it's an early piece that goes into that vehicle before everything else, because it's the way it's built.
Well, it has to be threaded through the bulkheads and so on. Typically you need good access to get it into place, and then once you've got it in, then you start doing things like sound deadening and putting some other sort of bulkier items like the dashboard and the seats and so on, but they are all in turn being plugged into the wiring harness. So yeah, it's absolutely sort of job one on the production line.
And I think there was thinking about back to the early question from Curtis there, that but what in terms of the impacts of the sanctions on Russia, do you believe that will have an impact on European car production if that continues?
I think it will have a impact on global car production actually, and for potentially much longer. It's none of us are in a situation to guess how this will develop, but in terms of human suffering, it does seem that some sort of accommodation will be, might be reached relatively quickly. We certainly, all hope for that, and that will give Russia some, and Putin some face-saving exit and stop the hostilities. But the sanctions are not going to be wound off immediately. I don't think anyone would tolerate a situation where the sanctions were entirely wound back to where they were, given the loss of life and breach of trust and everything else that we've seen. So we're going to have some restrictions, I think, on Russia for some considerable period, and huge nervousness from Western or Japanese or American, any right-thinking nation, huge reluctance of them to invest in Russia and caution about trading with Russia. So the longer lasting effect is actually about raw materials. It's about gas supply, out of Russia. So if there were continuing hostilities, and there was then a interruption to gas supply to Germany in particular, which would be is highly dependent on Russian gas, but also, as everyone knows, a huge center for the automotive industry. Then, as I said in the blog, if we ended up with sort of a 3-day week for the German industry because there wasn't enough gas to go around to run all the houses and the industry and so on, then that has a massive effect. But beyond that, things like all the raw materials that go into catalysts, then Russia's a major provider of those raw materials, and so any vehicle that has a catalyst, so any combustion engine vehicle, would be affected by that. Either you don't have the material to make the catalyst, therefore can't make the car, or at the very least the price goes up, astronomically, and what's already a relatively expensive part of the car might double or triple in price.
And Steve, you make an interesting point in your blog about how Renault is the most exposed of all the OEMs because of its business interests in Russia. Can you tell us a bit more about what it has actually built up over the years and what it stands to lose?
Yeah, I mean, they're exposed from a corporate point of view. It's not going to affect sort of a Renault dealer or a Renault customer in Western Europe, but Renault have been involved with Avtovaz, what we would recognise in this country as Lada, since 2008. So going back to my Gaz times, Gaz was asked by the Russian government to look at Avtovaz and could we take it on and turn it around and so on. And my then Russian colleagues had a look at it and said absolutely no way, and one of the reasons being the level of corruption that applied at that time. And one or two of my Russian colleagues were not saints, but even they were shocked by what they saw. So the fact that Renault got in there in 2008, I think, with originally 25% stake, and then have built that up and turned it around so that they're now producing high quality vehicles related to the Dacias that we see in the West, but uniquely for the or not uniquely for the Russian market, but predominantly for the Russian market, they've done a great job and they deserve all credit for that. And if that ends up being nationalized, or they're forced to sell it off, as you see, Inchcape, you may have noticed, are selling off their Russian dealer interest for, basically they don't see it as an environment where they can do business. And they'll get pennies in the pound. And if Renault ends up doing the same, that's a sad end to what's really been quite a remarkable turnaround over the last 10 or 15 years.
And what are your thoughts on some of the other Western European manufacturers who are producing in Russia? I mean, Nissan, for example, are quite heavily involved in manufacturing, aren't they?
Yeah, I think they, some pulled out already back in what, 5, 6, 7 years ago. I think on the back of Russia going into Crimea, I think was the trigger.
Yeah.
But GM withdrew at that point. Others have cut back; they've been more distanced. But there are some small, manufacturing plants locally, one or two larger ones, as you say. The Chinese have come in and sort of backfilled the gap in the market with imported product from China, and those are, unfortunate. Particularly if you go back to think about how Russia was operating, back in 2005, 2006. It was very open, and Putin had actually put in place some very not relaxed necessarily, but some really strong incentives for Western car manufacturers and component companies to invest. And so it's a shame to see that being wound back, but it's not an existential risk for them. I mean, does that mean that Nissan, will not sell as many cars in Russia, or Volkswagen or whomever? Yeah, probably, but it's not going to be a sort of huge hit on their balance sheet or profitability in the same way that anything significant on AvtoVAZ would be on Renault.
And I mean, we're talking about Ukraine and we're talking about Russia, and we all the way through your blog, we talk about the humanitarian part of this, which is clearly the number one risk position with this, and sadness with it all. But in terms of this, there's an impact in the broader sense across the surrounding countries around Russia and Ukraine, and the distribution and labour impact on people that work in surrounding countries to those areas, that this is having a significant impact on as well, isn't it? That it isn't just isolated to Russia and Ukraine, is it, this?
No, I think, again, we have to wait and see what happens, and hopefully the hostilities come to an end quickly, and Ukrainian, displaced Ukrainian families will feel that they have sufficient security to go back home. But when you've got a neighbouring country that has been so aggressive, and which, because of our dependency on Russia for some key natural resources, creates disruption in the economy as well, then that has to just sow general uncertainty around economies in general, and within that, obviously, the motor industry is a significant part of it. If you live in Poland or one of the countries that neighbours Belarus or Ukraine, or Russia directly, then you're going to be looking over your shoulder a little bit now as to what's going on. As long as Putin's there, then maybe we don't wonder so much. Maybe the one thing he has done is showing his cards, so that we have a better understanding of the risks.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, Steve, many thanks from both of us for joining us for this Motor Trade Radio's special podcast. Yeah, we really do appreciate hearing your views on how the war in Ukraine will affect the sector, certainly over the coming weeks. And it's worth drawing everyone's attention to the blog that you posted at the beginning of the week. It's on the ICDP.net website, and it's called the least important thing about the Ukrainian invasion, and it is a really good insight, sort of sobering insight into the ramifications of what's happening. And of course, as we always say, if anyone wants to get in touch with you, they can reach you on LinkedIn.
Yeah, and I think the title of the blog was deliberately chosen. We work in the industry and we have a job to do, but it is the least important thing. I think that the idea that 60, almost 80 years on from the Second World War, we can have the scene of tanks running down avenues of a European city is just appalling. So hopefully we get that sorted first, and then we can pick up the pieces from the automotive industry afterwards.
Yeah, very
most
true.
Definitely.
Yeah. I mean, again, thanks for coming back on, Steve. It's always a pleasure to have you back on, and I think the very sobering thoughts there on the situation over in Ukraine, but as you say, putting it in context a little bit for the automotive sector and some of those immediate and medium impacts it may have.
Yeah, that's a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to join you both, and as you said, anyone that wants to get in touch, then relatively easy to find.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, as I say, welcome back on in the next issue as well. So thanks a lot for joining us today, Steve.
No problem.